Welcome back to the Bold Moves podcast. We are glad that you are here. Let's give it up for Corey Hepler. Yeah.
Oh.
And Kristen Hogue. Yeah. That was pretty lame, but that was a good introduction. I'll take it. We'll roll with that. The reality is what we're talking about today is really, really important. As we wrap up our Rooted series at Crossroads, we're talking about the church and how important and integral that is in the daily lives of people who follow Jesus. And the reality is Jesus created the church as the best vehicle for us to not only connect with God ourselves, but to connect others to him as well. And so there's this beautiful thing that's created in the New Testament, and it's like, let's talk about this. Like, what is the church? Why is it important? And how does it impact our lives? And the reality is, I'm one of those guys that grew up in the church. Like, when I say I grew up in the church, my dad was a pastor, and in the olden days, we had Sunday school, Sunday morning church, Sunday night church, Wednesday night church. And I was there an hour before and an hour after all of those gatherings. So I grew up in the church. That's the only way I know how to explain it. Does anybody else have any type of similar experience to that, or is that just me?
Well, certainly not to that level. I mean, I spent a lot of time in the church building for sure, especially as I grew up and got a little bit older and was in like high school, youth group. My heart just, I had to be around that environment. But like, definitely not quite to the level that you were,
not that extreme.
You were there.
Yeah.
Kristen, what's that look like for you?
Well, my dad was the music director, worship person.
So he was involved.
Yeah, so we were there a lot, and I actually enjoyed going. So if he had to go, I went with him. So or if he was just doing anything, like if he was setting up for practice or whatever it was, I went. I babysat at the church. I was involved in all the
So you were always there also.
So I was there a lot.
So when you grow up in the church, what you realize is like, I knew all of the like nooks and crannies of this massive church. I knew where all the secret rooms were. I could climb up where the HVAC was and look down. Like literally, I was that kid that was just kind of everywhere. Probably shouldn't have been a lot of places.
Our church had a bell tower, and we weren't like really allowed to go up there. Oh, but we went up there. But I mean, it was spooky. It was creaky up there, and I think there were like mannequins in some of the closets. And as a kid, like, why were there mannequins? Now that I think about it, I don't know. But it was creepy, and they were like, "Don't go up there."
I would say this as a kid, one of the spookiest places I could remember is being like the first one in church on a Sunday, and like going in the basement of the church. It's like, this is creepy. Like, it was weird, but it's
funny now, like going to Crossroads where our building is not super old. I mean, it's 25 years old, something like that. So it still has a fairly new flavor to it. But like, I was recently going to just a friend's church into the building, and it's the smell. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
I don't even need to like explain it.
Yeah.
The
it's just like
smell.
A musty. I don't even know. But it's church. It's a church smell. As soon as you walk in, you know what I'm talking about. So like that's definitely more so like what I grew up with, and all the old buildings have weird nooks and crannies, and like what were they thinking about?
Because there was like 14 different like church addition projects that they do, and this was for Sunday schools, and they had to build a weird hallway to the gymnasium, and then like the food gathering place, and their little library, whatever it is.
Although Corey, last night I was at the church and I had to go under the stage, and I've never been under the stage before.
Crazy place.
It was kind of. I didn't enjoy it.
Of course, our stage at Crossroads is so much taller than normal stages. It's like 4.5 feet tall. It literally is. It's like people who come to speak at Crossroads as guests are like, your stage is really high. And so my comeback has now been, we've built it high so that when you're speaking, you can look down on people. Like, it's very funny.
Yep.
So all of that, like, what are we talking about? All of that to say, like, the church, let's be clear, the church is not the building. Like, we kind of associate the church as a building. The church is actually the people. And that's a really important thing to delineate, because when people, have problems with the church, they're not having a problem with a building. Right? They're having a problem with people, right? And conversely, when something happens to you at church that inspires you or changes your life, it's because you've encountered God, and you've done that in community with people. Other people have poured into your life and shaped you. And so when I think about my time in church growing up, I was there early, and now because of that, I can do wheelies in any wheelchair that you show me. I'm amazing at foosball because that was the only thing there, and I would play my sister and my brother and that. So yes, I do have those amazing skill sets that I can now use to make millions of dollars in wheelchair wheelie competitions.
Yeah, or not.
Or not.
Yeah.
But the reality is, I had so many people and so many experiences in church growing up that formed my life. It was transformative to my life.
Absolutely.
Because those were moments that changed the trajectory of my life. And those only happened because I was in church.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Like, even as so the church I grew up in, I was there until about 25 years old.
Yeah.
And I can like remember the building really well. If I would go in, I would know my way around. But when I think back to those years, I don't think about the building.
No.
Right.
It's the people that were involved in my life.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
The people that made an impact on me. And man, I still think so fondly and still have such affection really for all of that. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah. You just said the people, like when you think back, there are people that like, obviously like all my closest friends, I grew up with at church, and actually like because of our friendships or vice versa, my parents became like really good friends with their parents. And so then it became like a full family thing. But you said you think back on the people, and I instantly thought of all the old people that I had at our church, and they're still alive.
Oh, okay.
Like they were old then. How are they still
you're saying this is a real conversation I had with my mom this last week. She mentioned that there was a lady at the church I grew up in who had just turned 96 and still lives at the house she lived in when we were attending there. And I remember I was only 5 years old when we moved to Elkhart, and my dad took over at this church. Yeah. So you're talking 42 years ago. And it's one of the earliest memories I have. One of the first things we did was we went to this couple's house. They cooked dinner for us. And I have a memory of that at 5 years old. And I remembered thinking at 5, man, we're eating dinner at this old couple's house. And that was 42 years ago. And she's still alive and still lives in the same house.
She was
amazing.
Nearly the same age you are now.
Corey, that's too far. That is deeply offensive. Enough. So when you think about that, though, you're doing life and community.
Yeah.
You have people who are pouring into your life.
Sure.
And then you get to have the opportunity to do the same, to pour into other people's lives as well. And it's kind of weird to think about that, because the people that poured into our lives, they weren't always perfect. And yet God uses all of us, if we're willing, will allow him to really truly speak into people's lives and form the direction of their spiritual lives. There were people when I was in our youth group growing up who just spent time with us. They played basketball with us.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of men who are now in their 60s who spent a lot of time with me when I was a high schooler and just showed me how to live the life. Like, they weren't perfect, but man, they loved Jesus, and they were just helping coach us on the way. And I deeply appreciate the time they invested in me. And I still see those guys from time to time, and we have great memories. Yeah. And it's amazing to know that God uses anybody and everybody if you're just willing to put yourself out there. That's part of the community that we get to belong to and be a part of.
It's funny because you say, well, they weren't perfect, and that's true. Like, I definitely know, I won't name names or anything, but there's like, I think as you just realize this about people in general, as you grow up, like your heroes are maybe not as heroic as you thought they were. And so like, I don't know, you look up to these people, and then you grow up and realize like, they're just average people. And I've seen some of the actually dumb mistakes that they have made since
absolutely.
then. And that's not to disparage them, but actually to hopefully encourage us, because that means that no joke, I'm sitting here today in part because some of those people poured into my life
100%
and helped me draw closer to Jesus and learn what it meant to follow him and what his specific calling on my life was.
Yeah.
And so like today I sit here as a byproduct in part because of some of that. Right. So like to know that some of those people maybe aren't perfect and they haven't done everything perfect, that makes me feel good because I know my flaws now.
100%.
I know the way that I probably let some people down along the way.
Sure.
And I'm encouraged by that because you don't have to be perfect along the way. That's helpful to know.
Yep.
Yeah. I've watched when I remember as a kid seeing some of the adults, my parents kind of shielded me as much as they could from, the real hurts of the world and things that happen. Like because my friends were friends with, like, their parents were friends with my parents. And so they would, life happens as adults, like sin happens and things like that. And so they would try to shield us as kids.
Yeah.
But it's now being on the adult side of things. Like I feel like I've watched how their lives have changed, and like they still can pour into us, even though they went made bad choices, maybe made whatever. But that's been neat to look back, and I probably haven't talked to them in so many years, but I feel like I could call them today.
Yeah, and those are the quality of relationships that you build in the church.
Right.
So here's what's crazy. Let's talk about this in real terms. When we talk about church, like we've all talked about church memories growing up, and I can think of friendships that I had in youth group that were amazing and just formative moments that helped form my spiritual life. I remember going forward, receiving Jesus, being baptized. Moments in youth group, or there were just moments of revival and just like beautiful moments.
Yes.
I remember the moments where things got crazy and we were all being weird and dumb and making terrible choices. Those happened also. But the reality is, when you think back to church and all of the moments that you experienced through life, and I would even go into adulthood, what's crazy is that I don't go back to like sermons, like, there was that sermon. It was when that sermon, it as a pastor, that's like a shot to the ego, right? Like, come hear my amazing sermon that you will not remember for the rest of your life.
Ask somebody 30 minutes after they leave what you spoke about.
Ask me what I spoke about last Sunday. It's one of those things where, yes, you go to be fed. We grow in the knowledge and the wisdom of God, and obviously that speaks to us. God speaks to us. He draws us closer to Him, and we're learning. Like, do I remember a specific sermon from growing up? Not particularly. And yet the sum of all of those sermons that I listened to and the times I invested in spending in God's Word, all of those have formed the character and the knowledge base that I have today. So we can't say that doesn't matter. It absolutely does. You don't always recognize that in the moment, but the reality is it comes down to the relationships that you have. You are putting yourself in a situation where God can speak to you, not only through His Word and His presence, but through the people that you've surrounded yourself with. And it's those relationships, doing this in community, that I really think is the power of the church. And I think we overlook that a lot of times.
I agree. So like, this is kind of interesting to think about. I think about this sometimes. Like, Jesus was here on earth. He died and rose again and was back on earth for a short period of time. And then He left, and He left the movement that was started with His death and resurrection in the hands of the church.
Yes.
And that's so interesting. Like so much so that, I mean, He says even the gates of hell won't prevail. Or
that's exactly right.
So like, when you think about that, what that means is that's relationships. That's people. We've already said the church is not a building. It's the people and the relationships and the community. And that's just so interesting to think about. Like that's how the message of Jesus, how He intended that for that message to get out to everybody on this earth. And so I don't know, that tells me a lot about God and His character and how important it is for us to lean into those relationships and not be too guarded and not be sitting in the back, in the shadows, in the corner, trying to stay away.
Yes.
I know that's like, listen, I've been there. I've gone to churches and intentionally tried to remain in the shadows for a period of time. But it's so much better if you get yourself involved in the community, start serving on a team to build that community. Because if you're serving on a team, there's just naturally relationships that will be formed out of it. So I don't know.
Because some people say, well, the church is too big for me to connect people. Like, no, there's ways.
There's ways for everyone, 100%. So I think to speak into that, Corey, that's a good point. When you are part of the church, you are taking advantage of the opportunity to claim your purpose. Like you are living into your calling. We're called to be part of the body. That's part of it. And in Acts chapter 2, when the church is set loose, they are on mission. They're living out the words of Jesus when He said, go into all the world and preach the good news, preach the gospel, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey all the commands that I have given you. Like, we are making disciples. We are sharing the good news. We are living on mission. And part of the beauty of being part of the church is, I think there's different phases. Like it's good, better, best. Like we talk about this at Crossroads a lot. Like if you're only able to join online, like join our online campus, it's like, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. Like join, like learn, take it in. But what's better? It's like, come out live, come experience worship and the presence and the fellowship that comes. That's better. And then what's best? Best is engaging in the life of the
Be part
church,
of this.
joining in on the mission. That's where truly you claim your purpose. You experience the fullness of God's presence in your life. You engage in that community. I think that's where God intends us to live.
Sure.
And so when we talk about, attending, serving, giving, all of these things are muscles that we flex in our relationship with God that are all made possible through the church. And the local church is an amazing outpouring of just the presence of God that is the center for everything that people are looking for. They're looking for hope. Yeah. We've got that. They're looking for community. We've got that. You're looking to claim your purpose. It's right here. Like really, the church has the answer to everything you're looking for. And I think oftentimes we take that for granted because we keep it at a distance. We want to sit in the back and just kind of like, I'm okay. And, for a season, that's true. You can be okay. Sometimes you need to take a back seat and just recharge. But the reality is God calls us to be a part of his family, to be a part of the body. And that's, I think when you circle that, engaging actively in the life of the church, that's where life is truly lived to the fullest. And on top of that, I think the most important piece that I've realized as a parent is that's the best way to pass down the legacy of faith to our kids.
Sure.
Honestly, I mean, those things happen at our homes, the habits and the routines that we have of praying with our kids and reading the Bible, those are obviously critically important. It's not all on the church to teach our kids, but being part of that community and letting our kids experience that as they grow up in their formative years, oh my goodness, that's the best way to pass down that legacy of faith.
Well, that's good. And we can all speak to that. Like we bring our families to church and that's such an important thing. But I'm also like I'm wondering in my mind about like the people, because we believe at Crossroads, we have a specific calling to reach people in our community who have no affiliation or connection with church and maybe have never gone to church either regularly or ever at all, stepped foot inside of a church building. And so like, what do we say? Like, what are some things that we can do to give hope and encouragement to people who's like, okay, we can sit here around this table and say we grew up in a church and that was helpful and it was formative, it was important.
A lot of people don't have that history.
But man, if you don't have that, what do we do? How do we get started with all of that?
Yeah. And giving them an entry point to come in and be okay to be who they are, right? That's where you welcome them as they are. You show some grace.
That's why culture matters so much. If we're going to be a church, a group of people who are gathered together, inviting outsiders into what Jesus has called them to, we have to be really vigilant to make sure that we don't allow the culture to become insider focused.
Yes. That's the trap.
Which that's one of the downfalls sometimes.
Every church drifts that direction without intentionality.
Easily. Yeah. So like that's one of the downfalls with community and connection is that sometimes you just love the people that you're around. That's not a bad thing.
Right.
But if we have no focus on what's happening outside of that circle, we're just missing out on some of the joy that God has for you in your own life. Like if you're not actively connecting people with Jesus, then you're missing out on a piece of what God has called you to do.
Yeah.
So what's interesting about that is the natural drift is for that to happen and become more insider focused. Yeah. And people do not like to admit that when you're insider focused and it's like, this is great, this is my church, this is all what I like that's when your church starts to die, because when outsiders start coming in and stop coming to Jesus and celebrating the changed lives, you've started your death spiral and it's going to just start shrinking up, like really, and your influence and your impact is going to start to get smaller and smaller. And so that's the battle, right? To stay intentional and stay on mission. Yeah. I think as we wrap this one up, I just encourage people to think in terms about how important the church is. It's not a building, it's people. It's people who are following Jesus, doing their best to become like him, and doing that in community together. Yeah. And I think I want to read one Bible verse. I think this is important. In Hebrews 10, it says, "Let us hold tightly without wavering to the hope we affirm, for God can be trusted to keep his promise. Let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. And let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near." Here's the thing. This just speaks to so many different ways that the church is important in our daily lives. And I just think it's really important that we lean into the fact that we get to be a part of a family. We don't have to do this on our own.
Hey, can I go back to the serving thing real quick?
Absolutely, you can.
There are so many people that show up or like they don't serve because they're like, I don't know where to serve.
Yes.
That at our church, at other churches, I'm sure, Listen, find your favorite staff member, find your favorite leader, and just show up.
Start there.
And say, what can I do to help you right now?
Yeah.
And then you'll find your group.
You're exactly right. That's a great place to start. Yeah. That's really funny.
And don't wait around for somebody to tap on your shoulder.
Because literally everyone needs help.
Yeah. So I think this is a good place to end. There are probably all kinds of people listening to this podcast that have said, I've had a terrible experience at church. The reality is I've had bad experiences with church. Like it's filled with people. Remember, the church is people, and people are awful sometimes. Let's just be real. Yeah. Just because they go to church doesn't make them not awful sometimes. Right. I can testify to that firsthand. So the reality is, at other churches, not Crossroads.
Oh, come on.
So the reality is, yes, there is pain in people's lives that is associated with church. People say, oh, I love church, but I can't stand Christians. I can't stand hypocrisy. And you're going to see that in life, again, because the church is filled with people. Right. But don't let the bad experiences negate the good. I really, truly believe there is a difference between good, better, and best. And it all circles around your ability to engage in God's family and involve yourself in the life of the church. Right. It's going to help you claim your purpose, answer the calling that God's placed on your life. Yes. It's going to help you pass that legacy of faith down to your kids. It matters. And so I just encourage everybody, man, make it the goal of your life that church is going to be a central part of your life and who you are and what you're about, because it really does help you grow in your relationship with God.
As a bold move, maybe take your next step on that ladder that we're talking about. Right?
Whatever.
From good to better to best.
If you're not involved with the church at all, just watch some services online. Yeah. It doesn't have to be Crossroads for what it's worth. Like,
I mean, it should be,
but
it doesn't have to be.
Online's available everywhere, no matter where you're located. So definitely join us at Crossroads Down Online. Otherwise, someplace else is fine. But if you're watching online currently, actively, like you're not sure, take that step, come out to either one of our campuses, or if you're in a location and there's no Crossroads campus close,
go to church somewhere, get involved.
We're all in the same mission together as the Big C Church, right? Like all of the churches around the world, we're all on the same mission together. Each church's directive might be a little bit different, but so for us, it looks a little bit different than maybe some other place. But there's lots of amazing places to go. And if you're coming to Crossroads, just specifically to the people right now, you're coming to Crossroads, you haven't taken a step to get yourself involved, to engage in what's happening in the life of that church, and not just be a consumer and sit in a service and have a good time. And that's important. And hear from God as part of that. But getting involved and becoming a part of that community in that way is so crucial. Take that step. It's time. Yeah.
The bold move is go from good to better to best. I have nothing to add to that. So listen, when it comes time to make your move, go from good to better to best. Be bold. What a terrible ending.
Hilarious.
Yep. Okay. Hey, let's do this. It's the church. See you guys later.